everyone, and good evening from Accra, Ghana, and welcome to the Internet Governance Dialogue. This is a session that we are going to be having with Avri Doria, who is a very well-versed person in the Internet governance ecosystem. We are going to have a one-on-one with her to know her engagement in the Internet governance ecosystem and how we can learn from her and also get busy as she is and achieve a lot more than her. On this note, I welcome you all, and especially to Avri. Avri, thank you and good evening from Ghana. Where are you joining us from?
Okay, hi, good evening, Raymond. I'm joining you from Providence, Rhode Island. In fact, I live in the Hope neighborhood of Providence, Rhode Island, something I very much like. And yeah, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon here. Happy to see you on a Friday evening with you. So happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And it is 6 p.m. here in Ghana. It's a big opportunity for us to have you as the first person on the Internet Governance Dialogue. To start with, so who is Avri Doria? Who actually is she?
You know, it's one of those questions that I keep asking myself and have been asking all my life. I mean, at this point, I'm fairly, but you know, if sort of I'm educated as in both philosophy and in counseling psychology. Those are my degrees. I worked as an engineer. I worked as a coder. I've worked as a policy person. So I guess I'm a person that likes the hybrid, that likes having feet in different feet, not the same foot in two places, but the different feet in different places. I like being a member of the technical community and being a member of civil society. And I don't want to have to choose between them. I like being technical, but I also like being policy and combining them. And I don't want to have to just pick one or the other. So I guess Avri is a hybrid looking for an identity and constantly trying new things to see what I can learn next. You know, I could talk about my own. Right.
So
yeah.
Okay. So your education has been in counseling?
My first degree, I was working on a PhD, and this was as I was getting into the industry. I was working on a PhD in philosophy. Specifically, the problem I had taken up on while working towards this dissertation was, how will we recognize AI when it gets here? This was, mind you, back in the early 1980s. I still don't know the answer, even though everybody tells us, AI has arrived. So I still don't know the answer to the dissertation I never finished. But basically, while working on that PhD, I was also working in the computer center, fixing bugs on early TOPS 20 operating systems. And eventually, I decided getting a PhD in philosophy was probably not the best idea. Well, I'm not looking into the camera. All my friends who had gotten PhDs before me were working in supermarkets. We're working, as clerks at the department stores. Having a PhD in philosophy back in the early 80s was completely useless. But here I could program, and Digital Equipment Corporation said, why don't you come on down and fix bugs for us here instead of there? And I did. And I ended up working at Digital Equipment in a group that eventually started working on operating system adjustments for this new protocol that these geniuses on the other coast were coming up with, this TCP/IP stuff. And so I got into it as a young programmer, coding for TCP/IP support.
That's great. So way back in the 1980s, you have already have a fair idea of AI. How did that come to you?
I was a philosophy student, remember. And I was in epistemology, the study of knowledge and how do we know. And at that time in the 1980s, there was big news. AI, it's right around the corner. It'll be here tomorrow. You just wait and see. It'll be here. And there was all this Turing talk. There was lots and lots of excitement about artificial intelligence was just about to happen. And I got excited too. And I looked at the Turing test and I said, nah, they'll be able to fool us in no time. Even back then, there were some pieces of software that could almost fool us into thinking it was intelligent on the other side. So the Turing test is not enough. For sure now, AI has already passed the Turing test. You know, it could fool any of us anytime on lots of things. So, but to me, as a philosophy student, that wasn't enough. And so I was sort of saying, yeah, but how will we know? And so I started to developing a notion of, well, what does it mean to be an intelligent system? And what other intelligent systems are there? And how could we combine it? And on and on and on. And it got really, really complex. And as I say, I never got to, and so still today, I look at the AI. I don't call myself a specialist because I'm not working on it. I look at the AI from that same epistemological vantage point and say, yeah, but, you know, is it intelligent? Is it, at what point do we know? How do we know? You know, but then again, you know, we almost get into that same solipsist talk that we get into when you ask, well, how do I know she's intelligent? You know, maybe she's not. So, you know, so it gets up to all tied up. So I still don't know the answer. And I still don't consider myself an expert. But since then, I've watched it. I've read about it. I've thought about it, but I've never coded it. It's not one of the things. While I did a lot of coding in my youth, which was mostly operating system level, I've never looked at AI from a coding perspective, only from the philosophical, epistemological sense.
Yeah, that's great. So as a young lady growing up and with an interest in the tech field, how has it been so easy for you to get into it, knowing very well that these days we still find it difficult to get ladies to be very active in the tech space? How has it been at your time compared to now?
Okay. First of all, I was never really that interested in the tech field. I was studying philosophy, but the part of philosophy I was studying had logic in it. And I loved logic. I loved mathematical logic. I loved the playing with symbols and such. Learning to program when I was back in college then and taking some courses in programming so that I would know, you know, how to do this stuff. I was also, before I got into philosophy, I had been a chemistry major, but that's a story for another day, how I switched from chemistry to philosophy. But so I had learned how to program. I knew how to program Fortran. I was working for a physical scientist who would give me a formula each week and say, translate this into Fortran. And that was easy. And I loved doing that. And it was a great job. So I was a coder. And then I went to digital and I was a coder and I fixed bugs. And then eventually I became a manager of coders and I became an architect of systems. I sort of evolved through that coding path, that management path, digital, and a lot of the companies I was in were always into, you know, promoting people for having at least that degree of diversity. And so I just moved along and, you know, basically was doing that. I eventually took the degree, the master's in counseling, when I became an architect and a manager. And my peer managers were all studying business. And I was going, no, that's not what I need. I need to learn how to talk to people. I need to learn how to influence people when I don't have authority or there isn't authority, or I've never been a person that liked authority very much anyway. But so basically, you know, I took the counseling then just so I knew how to interact with people. Very often in an engineering group, the problem would be that somebody was having problems at home. Somebody didn't want to talk to the person in the next cubicle. Someone couldn't work because somebody was sick in their family. There was always these other things. It wasn't, once I got to be a manager, I realized it wasn't always a technical problem that was causing a project to not move along. It was often very much a human. So that's why I got the degree in counseling, the master's in counseling. I've never worked as a professional counselor, but it's something I think of and know. So I was doing that.
Yes. So for instance, mostly in some of these engineering courses, whilst you were doing for the PhD, do you have more ladies that were also doing it? So because mostly you see less ladies in some of these classes, how was it at your time?
At my time, there were no, I wasn't in an engineering program. I was before engineering programs. And there was electrical engineering, and there was civil engineering, and there was chemical engineering, but there was no computer engineering at that time. It was in philosophy. In philosophy, yes, it was. So I haven't been through the educational world that most of the young women coming up today are in. I come from that generation that, for example, when I was a manager hiring programmers, I would hire, there were still almost no computer science people, but there were English majors. English majors were good. They knew how to understand how to code. Philosophy, musicians understood symbolic notation. So these were the kinds of people that were getting hired as programmers back then. Most of them were mostly men, because women were saying, no, I don't want to be an engineer. And the same thing that young girls do now. But some of us drifted into it and found it was something that we were good at, we were happy doing, it's only by accident that I ended up on the policy side as opposed to where I am now, as opposed to remaining a coder and a manager of coders.
Oh, that's great. So you mean those days, somebody who has done music could be doing coding? Somebody who has done English major could be doing coding. But is it on-the-job training for them? Or they have taken some short courses in their coding before coming on the job? How was it like?
Most of them would have been the type that, because coding was around them, they learned some. They knew, they knew some. There hadn't been a major, they hadn't necessarily minored in it. It's just that with any of those three majors, you could count on people understanding symbolic notion and the translation from symbolic, from human knowledge to something that was symbolic that could be encoded. And that's what you were really looking for. Coding was still being discovered back then. And yes, people were doing it, but it wasn't as engineered a field then as it was now. It was still very much a creative thing. My daughter went through some engineering training on it, very, very different than today. So, so it was how creative could you be? Can you create code that does that? It was still a novel experience, very different than it is now. And that's why I say sort of my experience, my drift, my, grabbing the next opportunity to get to wherever I've gotten at the moment, was very much serendipity. It's very much learn as much as you can. And when you see something that looks like it'd be a fun opportunity, give it a shot. Don't be afraid of failing. One of the biggest things that most humans have and such is we don't want to fail. You got to be willing to fail. If you're asking for advice on anything, it's, failure is something not to be feared, but to be learned from. Because if you don't take a chance on failing, you don't take a chance. Where, I'm at a transition point between my engineering career. I'd become a director of engineering. I was supervising research in a couple different places. My field of specialty back then was routing. And so I became a an architect on routing systems and an engineering director on routing systems. But then there was the crash of the 2000s and the bubble, the dot-com bubble burst. And my research funding, everything that I had built my career on sort of collapsed. And, I had to basically lay off. I had 3 months where I had to lay off people in 4 different sites. That's when the counseling education came in useful. Wow. I had to do lots of layoffs. And one of the things I had to do was call up a university and say, I've been giving you funding for the last couple of years. Well, that's over. My unit's going out of business. I'm closing it. Oh, that's terrible. We need that money. Does that mean you're unemployed? I said, yep, I'm going to be unemployed as soon as I lay off the last person. The WSIS meeting, presenting software that I was helping to develop for how to give networks to reindeer herders where there was no infrastructure. And I ran into an old friend at WSIS who said, you do tech, you've done philosophy, you should be in policy. And she introduced me into the policy world back in the first WSIS, actually between the first and the second WSIS meeting.
Activeness. Right. But before that,
that's the beginning.
I can see from your educational background that you have varied educational qualifications. But some people of the view that you must have a first degree in computer science, a master's in computer science, and a PhD in computer science. That makes you a special person in that field. However, in your case, you have a series of other qualifications, and you've given examples of how, for instance, psychology help you when you are laying off people. So in this case, what would be the advice will you give to somebody who wants to pursue strictly one field from the first degree, a PhD, as compared to you who has had several different qualifications that you think helps you? How will you bridge that gap?
The one thing I would tell people is any career, especially in today's world, any career you study for, you prepare for, is not necessarily going to last. There are waves and changes. So you have to look at the skills that you require as your entry point to your first job. You got to get into that first job. And that's critical. Once in that first job, it almost becomes your career's responsibility to keep learning new skills, to keep widening that portfolio. You hear a lot, and this is me now going into almost the career counseling part of my education, and you hear people talking about portfolio careers, and that's probably the term you would apply to somebody like me, is that all through life, learn something new, take courses. For example, while on the board of directors of ICANN, I had the opportunity to take courses at Harvard Business School and at Harvard Kennedy School. So I got myself certificates in being on a board. I got myself certificates in leading a non-governmental organization, so I added to my portfolio these 2 extra certificates. So now I got the philosophy and this. On the computer science, I was always, how resumes say a degree in blah, 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 or equivalent. I had the equivalent. I had done the programming. I had done 20 years of programming and such. So that becomes very part of it. That, in other words, we somehow have a notion that we'll study real hard, we'll get the career, we'll get the job we want, and then we're set for life. That last one is the one that's a mistake. It's a constant learning. It's a constant picking up new pieces of portfolio. It's being good at guessing. People are starting to talk about this thing now, but not enough people seem to understand it. Maybe I will go study about this thing now so that in 3 years, when they're desperate for people that know this, I can, hey, I know it, look at me,
Yeah.
and make yourself visible And obviously I have this whole notion of you want to be seen, you got to make yourself visible. But, that always be picking up new skills, picking up new portfolios. Every time you get a certificate from something, that's a piece of completion. It doesn't necessarily have to affect you today, but it's a new part of your portfolio that the next time you go looking for something, you can say, I got this, I got this, I got this, I got this. Is any of that useful? And such. So that's really my both to women, but also to anyone. Part of what I learned while I was doing my counseling degree and while I was laying off all these researchers from 3 different countries when the bubble burst was that most of these people thought they were set for life. They thought they had a job forever. I'm a good engineer. I can do this. I can do that. I'm set. And then they're not, because the world changes on them. And they weren't ready. Some of them, have trouble holding on to sanity when that happens, because they identify themselves. I am a this. I am respectable because I am a this. And they lose that thing. Who are they? You asked me at the beginning, I've lost my thing. I was a board director. Now, who am I? Good question.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much for that advice. And I'm sure the viewers will pick something good from this and get some other certifications in addition to what they originally studied. So we now go into your engagement in the internet governance ecosystem. Those who might not know you will get to know you very well today. You tell us how you've been engaged, and you are one of those that most of us look up to because you have all the experience from almost all the stakeholders in the IG field. So with your engagement in internet governance, how will you define or explain internet governance to a lay person? If somebody walks up to you and say, I've been hearing a lot about internet governance, how will you explain that to the person? What is internet governance?
I usually start out by having them look at the issues. Have you seen all the issues that people are having with security on their systems these days? Have you seen all the problems that people are having with content and how content can't be controlled? Well, internet governance is the discussion of how do we create policies so that we can help guide those things, that we can build guidelines, that if necessary, we can build regulations and such to try and order that life, to try and help people, in terms of to deal with these issues. So that's kind of the approach. And where I've used that most often was, the Lyft drivers and the other drivers that were taking me to the airport. Is the place I've actually explained internet governance the most is to those folks, and talking about, so starting from that and they make the policies, they make the rules, they make the guidelines, they come up with the norms that have to be lived with, etc. And then depending upon their answers and their questions, I know which way to continue with the discussion. Okay. But it's usually that environment where they start out saying, so where are you going? Oh, I'm going to a conference. Oh, what's the conference on? Well, it's on internet governance. Internet governance, what's that? And then we move on from, I talk about, well, what do you do there? And so that's always kind of my lead in, is take the problem that is the internet governance problem that is most talked about in the news today, So today it would be children and Instagram and the court cases in there and or that might be the issue of the news that people know must. There's almost always, and if you don't know where to start, there's almost always that person that you're talking to. Well, no. Yeah. Oh, you mean the problem with them charging us so much for broadband and now TV? I'm not going to be able to get my TV over the air anymore because it's all going to be on the internet. Yeah, that kind of thing, and you go on from there. So almost everyone that knows about the internet these days knows about the internet has problems. Internet governance is trying to come up with policies that not necessarily fix, mitigate, improve, alleviate, prevent, et cetera, those kinds of things. So that's the approach I start.
Okay.
For me, I almost always start from something in the world that people would know about already.
Okay. Thank you very much. So if somebody asks you, why should the person be concerned or should be engaged in internet governance? Why should I be concerned? Anybody on the street, why should I be concerned? And is it everyone who should really be engaged in issues of internet governance?
Okay, the first thing was, why should I be concerned? Do you care when they shut off the network and you can no longer reach your people at home? Do you care when it's time for your favorite show and all of a sudden the government has said, wait a second, you can't watch that show anymore? Do you care about these kinds of things? If you do care, well, these are the areas that internet governance is looking at. Now, should everyone become an internet governance expert? Only to the extent everybody should become an informed citizen. That you should understand what's going on, that when you vote for your leaders, you want to understand. Now, if you're interested, if the problem is one that you look at and say, wow, that's interesting, but what about this? But what about that? If you start asking all these what about questions, well, then maybe you should get a little bit more involved in it. If you start saying, but they should do, but they should do, but they should do, well, then maybe you want to do. And that kind of thing. But for most people, if they're not asking oodles of hard questions and they're not saying, but they should do this or they should do that, no, just know enough to know that you can be informed. Know enough that if you see something screwy on the network, maybe there's a policy reason. Is there a policy that should be checked? Do you care enough about this thing to try and do something about it? Those are the questions that, but no, we don't want everybody in it. Kind of want everybody aware of it and paying attention, like democracy. People got to know what's going on in their government. And people think I pretty much covered that.
Yes. Okay. So does everybody have a stakeholder that they can play in when they want to engage in internet governance?
Okay.
So for instance, somebody says, oh, I don't have an IT background, so I don't know how I can engage in internet governance. I'm just an internet user. Do people have a stakeholder they can easily play in and fit in? How is that like? Okay.
Except that you added the word easily in there. And so I'll back off from easily for a moment. I'll get back to easily.
Okay.
Yes. First of all, looking at stakeholders, in fact, one of the things that I'm writing at the moment and hope to finish before this talk today, but didn't, is on the whole notion of roles and responsibilities, what it means to be a stakeholder, and within internet governance, the way they divide up stakeholders can be confusing. So, for example, in the basic Tunis agenda notion of stakeholders, there's civil society, there's private, there's business, there's governments, and then there's, other people, but everybody is either in a government or in civil society or in a business.
Okay.
And that, but you look at ICANN where we divide them into, well, there's user communities and there's contracted parties and there's registrants and there's specialists in security and specialists in root server and governments. And now it tries to offer a place for everyone. For example, at the moment, having left the board and finding myself sort of, gee, who am I? Do I have a stakeholder group anymore? I looked around and said, well, I'm still a user. Whatever I used to do, because I came off the board, I'm currently unemployed, I'm looking for work. And so who am I? I'm still a user. And so I've started, hanging out with the folks at large within ICANN, sort of, well, how does that all work? What do they do? And basically I wrote this short piece in my blog where I talked about being a renewbie, that, coming out of the board, and I was a member of the ICANN board. It was a wonderful experience. I loved every minute of it, but now I'm not, so who am I? if I want to stay in the ICANN world, do I have a stakeholder group? Yeah, there's ex-board people and nobody listens to them anyway. But, can I sort of reintegrate myself in? Can I look at it? So then, I'm still, it's only 3 months now that I'm in my adjustment, but I noticed in the last week, after 3 months of sort of mostly watching and listening and, sort of hiding at the back of the room. Okay, it's virtual. It's hard to see the back of the room, but hiding at the back of the room, sort of being less pushy, because I'm a fairly pushy person. You probably noticed over the years. I've noticed that all of a sudden I started speaking again. And I started to feel comfortable in the role of, I'm a member. I belong to 2 of the at-large structures. I belong to ISOC Finland and ISOC New York, and so I'm an at-large member.
That's great.
I'm an at-large. I don't have any official role. And so I've started to feel comfortable. But one of the notions that I like about this Renewbie is, one shouldn't assume that because I came out of the board and knew all this board stuff and did all this board stuff and was either any good or wasn't any good or whatever, doesn't matter anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's the past.
That's great.
So who am I now? And at the moment, mm-hmm. I'm an at-large member. If you look at me in the ICANN world, I'm an at-large member. If you look at me in the IGF world, I'm a secretariat, for a dynamic coalition. If you look at me in the IETF world, the IETF was the first of these organizations, because I was in that even as a technical person. I'm following a couple working groups on identity management and distributed systems, because it's a subject that interests me. It's not something I know about, but I'm learning as I follow. And I'm a member of their ombuds team. So, I've got a little bit of a role there. I've got a little bit of a role in the IGF. At the moment, I don't have any role in ICANN, but I'm still on role vacation. I have no responsibilities in ICANN and no role, but in the others. And so I'm in one of those periods where, even having a long career, I have to rebuild myself. The world I had that was supporting me fell apart. I was a board director, that was paying my salary, or some of my salary. I still have my retirement insurance, such as that's worth in the United States. But anyway, and okay, I lost my job. In a life situation, yes, at ICANN, I lost being a board member. In my real world, I lost my job. So how do I rebuild?
Okay. So I can see you've had a lot of engagement in the various stakeholders, but how did you get into internet governance at the first place, please? How was your entry?
Right. My entry was fairly lucky. As I said, I was at the WSIS, the WSIS 1 meeting. I guess that was in Geneva. And I was giving presentations on the technology I had developed with others for doing networks of reindeer herders, and how.
So for those who don't know what WSIS is, what is it? What exactly is WSIS?
WSIS was the World Summit for the Information Society. It was a multi-year process by the UN, entrusted to the ITU, to basically figure out, how information society fit with the world, fit with ITU work, fit with such. So, it was, what was it? 4 year, 6 year, 4 year. But anyhow, it had 2 stages. The first one was Geneva. The second one was Tunis. I was at the first one in Geneva with technical presentations, work on SNet, a Sami networking in the Sami lands of the north. While I was there, I met some of the people that were involved in the policy stuff of WSIS, and they basically brought me in. I got involved with civil
which year was that?
What year was that? 2003? I think that was 2003.
1 year ago.
No,
Okay, yes.
oh yeah, 21 years. Yeah, just about. Yeah, short time ago.
Okay.
And then basically from there, I got involved with civil society. I was one of the ones that was picked to be in the working group, the WIGIG, the Working Group on Internet Governance that the UN Secretary General put up together. I was one of the technical policy people because I was coming from the technical side still very much at that point, and was part of the WIGIG that people talk about being one of the cornerstones of Internet governance. And I'd say for anyone that wants to get into Internet governance, read the WIGIG report and read its companion piece, the WIGIG background report. Because within those two documents, almost every issue that we're still discussing 20 years later was touched upon. It was probably in a different place. We talked about the issue of who makes the governments, who does it, is it multi-stakeholder, what's the role of governments, what are the roles and responsibilities, all that stuff was talked about to death in the WIGIG report and the WIGIG background report. So anybody that's really into it, especially from a theoretical point of view, I said, read those two documents because the arguments are still happening. That was just the sort of the beginning.
That's a great advice for those who are engaging in internet governance to read those two very important documents.
And then you'll find there's many more documents after that, and people wrote books about it and all that great stuff. That was just the sort of the beginning.
That's a great advice for those who are engaging in internet governance to read those two very important documents.
And then you'll find there's many more documents after that, and people wrote books about it and all that great stuff. I always recommend go back to the original source, then read the commentaries. From there, from there I got involved in the IGF. I was on the secretariat of the IGF, working for Marcus Coomer for the first 5 years of the IGF. And then later I was on it as a multi-stakeholder advisory group, MAG member for 3 years. So that was my IGF phase.
That's great. Okay, so you've mentioned a couple of times that you were part of the ICANN board, and now you are no more. How long have you been on the ICANN board?
I was on it for 6 years.
That's 2 terms.
That's 2 terms, right? I got 2 terms. I did not get the 3rd.
Okay. So how does one get into the ICANN board? And how did you get into it?
There's several different ways. Half of the board members are elected by one of the supporting organizations or the advisory committees. So in other words, you could be elected by, from within the GNSO or elected by at large. And at large has 1 seat, GNSO has 2 seats, CCNSO has 2 seats. I think it's 2 seats, but anyhow, I might be wrong about the numbers. I'm definitely wrong about the numbers, but that are elected. No, it's probably only 2. And then the others are picked by the nominating committee. Now, the nominating committee takes people, both insiders and to some degree, and people from outside the community. And so part of the nominating committee's role is to bring in new blood, bring in new perspectives, bring in diversity. They're the ones that have the responsibility for diversity. Everybody's sort of got a little bit of responsibility for diversity, but the NOMCOM is the one that's supposed to look at what all the other groups did in their own bottom-up manner and sort of say, we don't have enough of these, or we have too many of those. And so then NOMCOM tries to compensate a little by doing that. The extent to which they do it right is one of the issues of the transition, and it's one of the pieces of work that ICANN is still working on. How does it really become diverse, and diverse in how many dimensions? And then you go through the NOMCOM. I had tried to get elected once by the GNSO, by the non-contracted parties house. I wasn't able to meet the threshold. I got a majority of votes, but I needed a super majority of votes, so I wasn't elected. So several years later, I tried the NOMCOM. And the NomCom, selected me. And then after one term, the NomCom selected me again. After two terms, the NomCom didn't select me. So here I am.
Those who are not familiar with what ICANN is Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. And NomCom is Nomination Committee. So those are some of the acronyms that Avri, yes.
You said something, and I wanted to say it's true. You say, I got into ICANN because of the NomCom, and that is also true. Way back in 2005, coming out of the Working Group on Internet Governance, I had been sent to do an investigation of ICANN to see if it was really multi-stakeholder. And I had written up a report, and I had said things like, ICANN should do this, ICANN should do this, ICANN should do this. And the NomCom at the time got in touch with me and said, hey, big mouth, you think we should do this, this, and this? You interested in a role in the GNSO? And yeah, sure, why not? And so that's actually how I got into ICANN.
So you are doing an investigation on ICANN on behalf of which entity?
The WGIG, the Working Group on Internet Governance. What we were trying to determine, it was just a little bit of, a tat. It was like homework. It was my homework that they sent me to a meeting. And to look at it, to watch it, and to basically come back and sort of talk about ICANN and talk about because I had the IETF background of being, a many stakeholder organization. So I was sent off to take a look at this one. I looked at it, I said, yeah, it's one of the best around. It's got more opportunities, but it's got problems, but yeah, it's multi-stakeholder, but it's got problem. Yeah, but it's, and so that's when ICANN said, you think we got problems? Come and help fix them. And so ever since then, I've been working on the things I thought were problems.
That's great. So the work of the ICANN board, as a board member of ICANN, what do they do and how is their work like? Is this something that you can combine with a day job if you are full-time employee elsewhere? Can you combine that with an ICANN board role?
It really depends on you and your life. I think that at minimum, an ICANN board position is a half-time position. If you're going to read everything that you need to read in order to be fully informed, which it is your responsibility to do as a board member, to follow the discussions, to participate in committees, to go to meetings that last for 2 weeks, etc. You need, first of all, you need schedule freedom. If you have a full-time job that says, be here from 9 to 5, you're going to suffer because you're going to have meetings between, you're going to have meetings at night, So if you have no life, if you don't, you're past family, you're an older retired person, or not retired, but you're an older person with a job, you understand your job perfectly, you do it in your sleep, and you can devote a half-time job at least to the ICANN board, then sure, you can do it with a full-time job. I personally think it's hard. Now, many people, maybe their full-time job is happy to have a board member and say, sure, you take 10 weeks, you take 10 hours, 20 hours a week, you take what you need to do the board. We understand that's separate from us, that, you can't do it for us, you're doing it for that. But yeah, we don't mind if you're using your time for that. So you can get that kind of, if your job is happy with you being there because it's important for them to have that kind of person in their staff, then sure, it can work. But if you have to actually sit at your desk and work 40 hours a week and then go home to children, a spouse, cooking meals, shopping, and that whole rest of a real life, it'll be hard. If you're a single person doing your own thing in the world, yeah, you could do it with a full-time job. But really, think of it as a half-time job. And if you want any leadership in the board, it's probably more than that.
In your case, how did you manage it to be an effective board member? Were you working alongside?
Okay, a little. And I being on the board was not a wise financial decision for me. I did
it. Wasn't.
Was not. I had to, because I was a consultant for several different, different contracted parties before I joined the board. The NOMCOM, the first NOMCOM, before appointed me, asked me if I would promise them that I would not be conflicted if they put me on the board. In other words, it's okay to work for a registry. There's nothing against it, but then you have to indicate that you're conflicted and you can't vote on any issue that relates to your conflict. And so they wanted me to promise that I wouldn't be conflicted. So that meant giving up several different contracts I had before I joined on the board. I felt that I would be able to get more than enough work in civil society. I also do human rights. I do all this other stuff, things for my portfolio. And I figured that I'd be able to do enough of that on the side to make up for the income that I was giving up. And I struggle. It's hard to do a civil society thing on human rights while you're a board member. I found out over the 6 years, it was difficult for me to speak and say, no. I don't have my ICANN hat on at the moment. I'm just speaking as Avri, the civil society person that's human rights. And I think you're wrong. And that's, is that what the ICANN board thinks? And so you find yourself in this. And so I was always also the work that I was able to get was less about talking and advising. It was writing. And writing is time intensive. And I'm not the fastest writer. I write.
What will you say if the opinion that the ICANN board is actually made up of only old people and they don't seem to attract younger people? What will be your response to that?
Certainly it does have an older median age. I mean, that's for sure. There are some people that are certainly middle-aged. I think in one sense, it has to do with when you get picked. It has to do with where your career is. It has to do with who wants it. But I don't really know because I've never been on the NOMCOM. I've been on the IETF NOMCOM. I've never been on the ICANN NOMCOM. And I don't really have the knowledge at my fingertips of how many age people apply and how that works in terms of picking it. I don't think they're all old, but I really don't have at my fingertips, the age, the full age range, the variance. We definitely tilt older. Certainly, many of the people are seniors in their career. Now, some people might say, well, having lots of experience is probably helpful, but also having fresh views is also helpful. So, and I see who's running for various board seats, and some of them are young, and I wish them luck in their elections. But why the people of it will pick one versus another, a young versus an older, that's not a specialty of mine. And obviously, if I was good at that, I would have gotten a third term.
So what is that one advice you give to somebody who is considering to be an ICANN board member?
Is, first of all, really want it. Really think about your financial ability to afford a half-time job with all that travel, with all that preparation, with whatever you got going on family-wise, etc. Really think about that part. But if you really want to do it, go for it through the through the NOMCOM. Be prepared. I'd say learn as much as you can before you do it. I'd say if you're going for it, make sure you've read the bylaws before you get into the interviews. Know what's going on. Follow the news. Don't just put an application in and then say, I'm great, they'll pick me. But study, understand what the issues are at ICANN at the time while you're applying. Follow, all those little newsletters, etc. Familiarize yourself.
Go to IGF, the Internet Governance Forum. What is your engagement in the Internet Governance Forum?
At the moment, I'm just getting back into it. In other words, as you know, I was very active. I was member of the Secretariat. I was a member of the MAG. But when I got on the board at ICANN, the board, it might be changing now with the new board chair, but before then, it was really an ICANN staff thing. And the board, so it was one of those situations where one couldn't say much. At least I didn't believe that one could say much on the IGF, and things are changing now. So I sort of pulled back, and the only thing I stayed involved with was the Dynamic Coalition on Schools and Internet Governance. So I stayed active in that part of the IGF and such. Recently, since coming off the board, I've started, attending the strategy meetings again, and sitting at the back of the room at the MAG meetings, etc. So I've started at this point to re-involve myself. I have no function other than the DC SIG Secretariat function, but I'm spending more and more time re-educating myself. That whole notion I've used of being a re-newbie, that I'm not new, I understand the structure, but I'm kind of relearning how to be part of it again. What roles are there? Where can I be useful? For me, one of the most important parts of things has always been, am I being useful? Am I doing something here that needs to be done, that is of use, that will make things better in the long run? I also, one of my big interests is I'm not into, I want to change things big. I'm really one of those that likes to plant seedlings and get things firmly into the ground so that in 5 years you'll actually see the effect and have a real effect that is sustainable. Because I've always worried about, and this is one of the big fears I have lately, is you can work really hard to achieve something important and then move on to the next thing. If you do that, then the thing you did is not sustainable. As soon as you walk away, the people that disagreed with you will start chipping away at it. And so it's not only can you change things, can you create new stuff, but can you help it be sustainable? And that at the moment looks like almost the harder problem of getting sustainable change as opposed to just change.
Great. So you indicated you play very great role in the DCSIC, which is the Dynamic Coalition for Schools on Internet Governance. It's a role that you've been playing extremely well for us, and we so much grateful for your volunteering in that role. So what is that one thing that you are so much proud of as part of your engagement in the Internet governance ecosystem?
I think helping to sustain and enrich in the multi-stakeholder model, helping to do something about its understanding, helping to sort of keep it going, to not disrespect it, to sort of take its ethical notions, its modalities. In other words, I'm interested in, obviously, looking at my career, I'm interested in lots of specific issues. What I am most interested in is multi-stakeholder democratic modalities. I think that multi-stakeholder modalities are necessary for democracy itself to survive. I think that they are of critical importance. I don't think we understand them well enough at the moment. And by teaching in the schools, by writing the things I do, by talking, I think I help make them more solid. And that's what I look at multi-stakeholderism, the use and study of multi-stakeholder models. I think I'm contributing on both sides of that. Do I have any great achievements that I can wave at and say, this is what I did? I don't know. I'll wait until I'm dead and I'll figure it out then. But at the moment, I think I've planted lots of seedlings in sort of a multi-stakeholder forest. And tending to that is probably what is most important to me, though all the particular issues are important to me too. At the moment, I'm kind of worried. Content. God, what are we going to do about content? ICANN can't do it. IGF can't do it. What are we going to do about content? So, things like that. I'm really interested in the issue of the day because they're important. But for me, tending to the model and enriching the model. So many people want to say, "Oh, we tried it. It's done." No, it's a baby, and it's something that needs nurture and needs work, needs growth, needs care. So I'm proud that I think I'm a faithful caretaker of the model.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping up the multi-stakeholderism in the internet governance space. What is that one thing that you wish, if you had a chance, in your engagement in the internet governance ecosystem, you have done better or you have changed in your engagement in the ecosystem that you have not done yet?
That I have not done yet?
Yes. That you wish you had done whilst engaging in the ecosystem, that you are regretting for. What is that regret that you've not yet achieved?
I don't know. There are various architectural, policy architecture, internet architecture issues that I haven't sat down. I haven't been able to. I can't afford. I'm upset that I haven't written my book on multi-stakeholder models, that I'm still working on it, that it's so slow, that, if anybody pays me to write something, I write that instead of this book. So I'm really sorry that I don't have that yet. That I'm trying with my blog now. I'm trying, with trying to write it while I'm unemployed. I might as well spend my time trying to write. And I'm trying to get it written now. I think I have something to say about the multi-stakeholder model, but I'm a slow writer and I'm having trouble, because I have to try and find work that supports also. But I think throughout my career, I always put, because I do have a group of people to support, a family to support. I think of disabled spouse. I think of always taking the job that's going to pay me before I think of I'm going to spend my time writing. And so I've always put the writing second to the paying job. I needed the paying job. And so it really bothers me, I think, if I look at what I regret that I haven't finished that damn book yet.
Yeah, and we can't wait to have that book finally written. I'm sure a lot of things will go into it. If a young lady wants to engage in internet governance in general, how will you advise that person to walk through the stages as you have done with your experience? What will you be that walking steps will you give to such a lady and to start and reach where you have reached and achieve what you have achieved?
First of all, I'm not sure that I'd give different advice to a lady than a young fella. But I would say, first of all, look at the panorama. Take a time, do some reading, look at the panorama. Look at things like, for example, look at some of the free courses like the North American School on Internet Governance, or they have one that's virtual, they have it online. You can go. Figure out, first of all, which of the types of organizations are you interested in? Are you interested in the tech, the IETF create protocols? Are you interested in ICANN and its policy? Are you interested in global issues? Are you interested in your country's issues and look at your national IGFs? There's all kinds of, or various other organizations. Perhaps it's a local computer club. Pick one. Pick an issue that is of interest to you. Just while you're looking at panorama, say, oh, wow, these people are talking about identity management. I care about identity. Identity is interesting. Get involved and listen in an identity management thing. At some point, volunteer for some little piece of the work. Oh, yeah, I'll read it and edit it for English, or I'll do the reformatting of the end notes. Or, oh yeah, you need someone to take notes at this meeting? Yeah, I'm happy to take notes at this meeting. Basically, take on those tasks that require you to put yourself into it, require a little bit of learning, but not a lot, will give you more learning, will make you visible, and will get you to the point where someone says, hey, we need a co-chair. Hey, we need a co-author. You know, we need a this, we need a that. And you become the person that can raise your hand and say, I'm happy to do it. And you've got the cred. And as if you put your hand and say, I'm happy to do it, but have never done anything, you might be the only one with your hand up and sure you'll get to do it. And that's great too, but then make sure you do it. In other words, if you put your hand up for something and say, I can do that, even though you know you're stretching yourself, make sure you're ready for the stretch. And basically just volunteer your way through until you can get the paying job. Now, if you only have the time for the paying job, get the job you can, and part-time, pay attention to the governance, and do a little bit of volunteering on the side, you know, and such, so that eventually you could pull yourself over. So, but it really is getting yourself involved, staying outside the door, hoping that they'll invite you in to do internet governance is probably not the way to go. But you know, read their work, send them comments. You know, you want to get involved in ICANN, there's an open public comment on everything where someone, for sure, someone will read your opinion and they will, you know, report on it with everybody else's stuff. So if you've got an opinion, so even if you've never done anything before, no one knows who you are, but you listen, you read their document, you say, but how does this work? But isn't there this problem? But I see this issue. Write it down, send it to them, be visible, make yourself known. And those are the things that I suggest for anyone that wants to get involved, is do more and more, volunteer until they pay you. You know, I don't totally believe in fake it till you make it, because most people, when they're faking it, it's just trust that you know more than you think you do, you know. And that's pretty much the only advice I can give. Yeah, other than the more credentials you've got, the easier it is. People are credential bound. The more things you write, the easier it is, until you get too controversial, and then it might be a problem. But you know.
Thank you. So according to Avri, don't wait to be invited into internet governance. That is not the way to go. And lastly, what is the plan of Avri Doria for the next 5 years, future plans?
I'm not sure yet. I mean, I'm looking for a job. I mean, I've made that pretty clear. Anybody looks at my LinkedIn, they'll see the looking for work sign. You know, it's kind of like walking around with a placard outside the sidewalks that says, you know, unemployed, looking for work. So I'm obviously looking for the right sort of work that I do. I'm working on my writing. I'm developing my blog, you know, m17m.is, and trying to basically write more and more to be more visible again, because I think of my 6 years on the board, I was very visible as a board member in ICANN, but I stopped being visible in anything but ICANN. So now, you know, I'm sort of stretching my way back out again. I think of coming out of ICANN board as coming out of the cloisters. You know, I was a nun, and now I'm outside again, and I can speak freely again, and I can try to express myself again. So work on that writing, finishing that damn book, but also have to find a way to support myself, and keep working on interesting projects. There's a whole bunch of interesting projects I'm interested in. You know, some of them have to do with content, some of them have to do with identity, some of them have to do with various other things. And eventually, hopefully, somebody will hire me to work in one of those projects. In the meantime, I'll live on my American Social Security.
That's great. Thank you so much. And what will be your last message to our viewers who will be watching this later on?
If you're into internet governance, enjoy it. Enjoy what you're doing. You hear that? It's such a good collection of really complicated problems. The more you like complexity, the happier you'll be.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And this has been the first edition of the Internet Governance Dialogue. And our guest has been Avri Doria, who has shared her experience with us on how she started her engagement in the internet governance ecosystem, how she made it through, and advice for women and everyone else who wants to succeed in the internet governance ecosystem as she has done. And we hope you all pick something dear from this, and that will enhance your engagement in the ecosystem. On this note, I want to say thank you for joining us, and we're happy to host another person, probably if not Avri again for second stage of this discussion. We'll get another person to have another topic that will be of interest to the general internet governance ecosystem. So from Accra, Ghana, I say thank you and goodbye for joining us. Thank you, Avri, for joining us. I'm so much grateful for the opportunity. It has been a great privilege.
Thank you. It's been fun. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much for inviting me. I definitely appreciate being your first.
Thank you. And see you another time. See you at the other side.
Yeah. See you again.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.